How do I get to see all participants together in one screen?
I was just trying to figure that
Panels.
Once Trishita removes the shared screen, you'll be able to see that.
Okay.
I think there's this thing called the show grid view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be after she
And then
stops
you
sharing
click,
the screen.
and then you can click and drag to expand, and then you'll probably see all
Correct. Yeah. Karishma, are you handling the social media?
No, I'm not. I have too many Instagram accounts. I cannot add another one. That's crazy. That's what Instagram tells me.
Who's managing UAL this thing?
Trishita. Trishita's here on the call.
Trishita, will you message me everybody's handles?
I'll just do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Karishma, should we start? It's 6.
Yes, please. Yes, please do.
All right, and we've got quite a few people here. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm very, very excited to run this last panel discussion of the last 2 days. We have an amazing group of participants today. So I'm going to start introducing them. First off, we've got Danish designer Alexander Hinnerskov, who has a BA in product design from Central St. Martin's. His interdisciplinary approach led him to work with products, furniture, lighting, and interiors. He has worked with clients like Swarovski, Cartier, and more. Since 2013, Alexander has been teaching at UAL short courses in a variety of design subjects, supported by his academic knowledge, practical skills, and industrial experience. In 2017, he established his award-winning design practice, Studio Alexander Hinnerskov. Alexander is also the founder and chair of UAL alumni group in Denmark. Hi, Alexander. Can you just say hi to everyone so they know who you are?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Anirudh Mehta. He is an independent visual artist and graphic designer based out of Mumbai. He is the founder of Studio Big Fat, a boutique design studio that works on multidisciplinary projects covering branding, illustration, motion design, and packaging services. He has previously been commissioned to work on Puma, Facebook, Gates Foundation, design led for the title sequence of Sacred Games on Netflix, and more recently for Subco Coffee branding design.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the intro.
And next we have Ankita Trivedi, who is a spatial designer. Her work explores how spatial design practices can facilitate experiences that open critical conversations around social, cultural, and political issues, and how our collective imaginations can contribute in creating a more equitable world. Having graduated with a bachelor's in interior design from CEPT, Ahmedabad, and then doing an MA in narrative environments from Central St. Martin's, she has worked as a researcher, visual storyteller, and speculative designer in event design, installation art, and design for film. She's the co-founder of Living Midnight Narrative Outfit, a narrative-based design and research think tank, and continues to teach part-time alongside her professional practice. Ankita, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
And last but not the least, a popular among the fashion circuit here, we've got Nimish Shah, an alumnus of London College of Fashion, who's worked with Chloe, then launched his label Shift in 2010, and now currently is the creative director of Bhane in Delhi. Nimish's signature style and new wave mechanized sensibilities were born out of his need to usher practice built around environmental consciousness in the fashion industry. Nimish, you want to say hi?
Hey, guys.
All right, welcome you guys. I'm very, very excited to have this amazing panel. I think I'm going to start off with a few general questions. And I think the first and foremost is when we're talking about branding, and all of you all, have come from a very varied, you're very, very varied disciplines, from product to environmental design to fashion and graphics. One thing I think that ties you guys together, you all have sort of formed your own brands in a certain way. Some of them you'll have just started to figure out your sort of branding voice, and some of you all have matured in them. My question to all of you is, how does your brand image emerge? Like, what is your, how do you sort of, find your brand voice? Was there a particular moment in your design career, whether when you were studying or when you were practicing, that you actually said, okay, you know what, this is what my brand is and this is what I stand for, and I'm okay to hold on to this for the rest of my career? I think I'm going to start with Nimish. Could you tell us more?
Sure. Yeah, so I've realized, building brand is, you only know that you've built something much later when people recognize, these touch points. And then they come back to you and say, oh, this is so Shift, or this is so Khane, or, this is who you are. Because, of course, there's clarity. I mean, what's most important is clarity of thought. And then you should be able to edit well to be able to create a brand. Once you've done that, and then consistency. And you really only find out whether you've been successful or not through sort of consistent set of deliverables, and just whether it is collections or it is communications, having one personality, which is extremely important, because we get carried away with trying to do so many things, and then knowing what is good for the brand and what is not. So that's where, again, edit skills come in place. So I think brand building is a very, very long-term commitment. It's almost like a marriage, and you really have to grow bonds, and it needs that personality. It's literally how we say company is a living soul, a living personality, like in the eyes of law. It's exactly that. So this is the soul of that personality. And just conditioning the soul is very important. Innovating it, you see brand maturing over a period of time. Like it shows, because you start with something small, and then 5 years later there is a certain level of maturity, and 10 years later, and then 15 years later. So it comes through. Whether you look at Sabyasachi, you look at, but these are boutique businesses that have become big brands. Rather than sort of an FMCG which comes out with like a big announcement, and then they start at a much bigger platform, rather than being a homemade brand.
Right. When did you find that this is what my brand should stand for? Going more personally to you.
I think because it was so hands-on, and it was just such a trial and error when it started. I had no idea. You can build a narrative maybe after being in business of 15, 20 years, where you really know how things work. But when you launch a brand as soon as when I did, or like most of us, where we've had a little bit of industry experience, and then we've gone straight into setting up our studio practices. So at the beginning, it's really putting our best foot forward, right? We really want to show our best aesthetic. That becomes the house aesthetic, and then that personality sort of blends in. The way you write your captions, the way you name your products. All of these are sort of sensitive points about building brand. For me, it was really much later, almost like 3-4 years later, when people started identifying things that were me or my brand, and there was no branding on it, and then they would say, this is so Shift. It's such a non-tangible thing, right? Like, and it could be a haircut, it could be somebody's face, it could be a refrigerator, and that is an extension of the brand, and people's imagination have engaged. And we do that with spa products. We can feel like, okay, this is like an Amman service, or this is like a Taj service, or this feels like a bad business hotel. That's when you give a bad review, right? Because then you're let down because of your expectations for something else. So much later, and it's very rewarding, because if you start seeking that, then you're clearly doing it for the wrong reasons.
So you're saying you joined the dots backwards to say, hey, that's how my brand formed. But when you started off, you were not like, okay, I'm going to stand for this and sound like this and look like this.
So there were boundaries. So it was not like open for everything, right? Like there was an aesthetical boundary. There was there was a communication boundary. We didn't want to go like even sales. Like I actually said no for like exhibitions which were money making machines for like up until pre-COVID. And I declined. I said, because I don't want my product to be seen this way, irrespective of the price tag. I did not want it to be available in like a certain store. So there were sacrifices, but or more than that, it was just like, how you create like boundaries around for allowing growth. All fully aware that was not like there was it was strategic decision, right? And then much later all of this comes together, and then it just like rewards in much bigger way, because people understand that you're creating a certain pyramid of aesthetic, price, experience, and then you're distilling your brand experience for others.
Fantastic. What about you, Anirudh? I know you have a very distinct sort of aesthetic, and did you start off with that as it almost is your brand. You are your brand, you also just the way you are, since you are a single person, so somewhere between a graphic artist and a graphic designer. And yeah, did you start with your aesthetic right from the bang on, or did it also develop over time? When did you know, okay, this is what I really like to do? Was it at some point when you were in your course?
Yeah, I mean, I realized that as soon as like my first day at design school, where I realized that I can't draw as well as everyone else. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure out a way where I can communicate without having this particular skill set that everyone else seems to have. And that's kind of how my method of design, or my approach towards design, kind of took shape. So I was using the skill sets which I had, which was not thinking out on a pen and paper. And in design school, you're taught that like you can't do that. The first thing you have to do is you have to start with a pen and paper. But I couldn't do that. So I kind of used my own method. And even when I used to sketch or even write down ideas, I used to just do it on Illustrator. So I got really good at organizing my thoughts into Illustrator as opposed to sketching it out. And I think using the software kind of became my tool in terms of thinking. And it worked really well for me. And that's, I guess, how my design aesthetic or outlook kind of developed. So it was basically because I was handicapped. So that's what the answer is. That's the truth.
How fantastic is that? I mean, that's it's really worked out well for you, Ani. So no problems on that handicap. It's your superpower. Alex, I think I will, go on to you, and especially in product, right? How has it's very important actually to have a very clear aesthetic, especially for a studio like yours to stand out and to be recognized. How did you find your aesthetic? Again, was it during your time in college, or was it much later? Was it while working at these? You were working for a lot of brands earlier, but
Yeah.
did you find your voice?
I mean, being aware of a voice is obviously very important when you're producing work for other people. But suddenly you're confronted with your own and what you want to say, and how to stand out. And I think that's why it's the concept of telling your own story is very important, because we are individual, we have unique experiences, and connecting with those and manifesting those in our work helps us stand out in a market that is saturated. At least sort of the design, product, furniture market in Denmark has a very rich history, and it's a very saturated market. So it's so important to be able to stand out. I think where I became aware of it, and it's definitely been something that's happened retrospectively, is when I was confronted with a self-initiated project. So my final year project on my BA, where you're handed a project on a silver platter, and you have all the options in the world, but it's down to you. So it's sort of really, it should be almost like an existential crisis. And when similarly to Nimish, like you don't really know what's happening when it's happening. And it's later on that you start to build on it.
Right. No, it's really interesting because I think, there's, especially everyone who went to UL knows they have this whole idea of taking your own notes and keeping, a visual research summary. I think that really helps you figure, oh my God, like you said, every single thing is open. You could choose any style in the universe. And then finally the style you're most comfortable to use, which Anirudh, like you said, you just chose Illustrator, or, if whatever you decide to choose actually is what you're naturally gravitated or most comfortable with. And that's actually your voice in a way, right? So Ankita, I think that's
I would
really,
also,
sorry.
sorry, could I just wanted to add to that, maybe like the concept of it growing and building, like what is it that drives it? And I think there's a word we've kind of danced around a little bit maybe, and that's the customer. Like when obviously hopefully we all want to live off our work. And it's when that engagement happens with the customer, that's what kind of pushes us. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that in university we have that silver platter, we have all the options out there. But if we want to really hone in on, I guess what makes us very individual and very special, it's kind of what we can deliver to our customers. And also the concept of like brand loyalty, I think, is also something it kind of relates to this, like how do you build that, and that it is something that's very organic, because at the end of the day, the brand is the promise that we deliver to our customers, to help meet their needs. Those needs evolve. We as people, as artists, evolve, and it's the kind of joining of that is the goal, and it is the kind of the equilibrium to kind of dance on, that makes brands really iconic and successful.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not just about the aesthetic that comes through university, but then the confluence of that the customer really wants that what you're creating, and if it works in the industry. And I think that comes much later on then, after you leave university. It's still like, hey, people are still liking this, whatever you did there, it's still working. Or maybe you
Exactly
tweak it a little bit for what your clients want. Yeah. It's really, that's an interesting perspective. So Ankita, I think you are the youngest of this lot, and you've just started off your narrative practice. But you have from the very beginning when I met you, I think you guys have such a clear grasp on what you want to stand for, and I wanted to know about how you got to that understanding.
Yeah, I'll start off a bit early on. So both me and Nishita, who's my co-founder with at Living Midnight, we met the first day at undergraduate registration, and we were the only two people who were on time at 9 a.m. and we entered at like these two different separate doorways, and we were just looking. Even even the people who were supposed to get us registered, the administration was not there as well. So we were like, really? And we just looked at each other like, punctual, looks like, that's like a point in that person's favor. And then we just started talking, and we became friends because of our mutual love for punctuality, as well as when we next discovered, which was the next conversation point, which was Harry Potter, and then eventually stories. And we both, through the last 12 years, 14 years, 12 years, 12 years that we've been friends, we've just realized that stories have hugely transformed both of our lives and decisions in multiple ways. And and this is something that we were just reflecting on, that Living Midnight was essentially born out of our deep friendship and increasing frustration with the lackluster reality we found ourselves in after coming back from masters. It seemed like London was just a blip. We both came back, and then we both started working in similar jobs as the ones that we'd left before going off to London. And there was also a huge dose of missing London like crazy, and a loyal, deep, abiding love for stories, and making sure that we give back by trying to transform other people's lives using narratives the way ours had been transformed. So we found the essential base of it using the fact that we want to talk about stories that cover the fringe, that cover the marginal, that cover the underground, that are away from the grand narrative that has, taken over everything and everyone, and no longer are some of the voices represented. And that was like the first point of it. Slowly, as 2 years have passed, we've realized that Living Midnight, essentially, as we like to call it, is a shapeshifter. Because as new influences come in, new things come to core, we've realized that what we truly like to do or truly believe in doing is building worlds. Now, the way these worlds are built, that can be dependent, or the kinds of voices or the way we sequence them or the way we frame them are on the basis of these situated contexts and situated topics. But the far-reaching, like the large umbrella of wanting to build worlds has not really changed, and I don't think it will change going forward. So yes, that has been quite strong, and that's why we feel that that's going to take us forward, because we might just figure out the different kinds of stories that we want to change on the basis of the kinds of content that comes up. But I don't think that core idea would change. So yes, it does. As projects come, as customers come, or as people come, the methodology of building those worlds, of making sure how we represent those narratives does change, but that overall idea does remain constant, which helps.
So help me understand, Ankita, what you say you because you guys do experience and space design, a lot of exhibition design.
Yeah.
So obviously every client would want a very different sort of a very different brief. But what you're saying is you have a methodology, and with every single client you'd want to story tell, and you'd kind of pull out stories from their sort of realities. Am I getting it correctly?
Yeah. So that's definitely just one part of it. When you go in for that, the client and the customer and their agenda sort of feeds into one part of the narrative. The other part of the narrative comes from that context, the site, the place where it is in. It also comes from the place wherein you are going to immediately exhibit those contexts. So there are these, as Ishita likes to call it, under histories and under layers that surround not only just a person, but also a particular site. And when you're talking about experiences, so if you consider narratives, essentially, if you look at them conventionally, there are these series of events mapped chronologically, which have characters, which have a sense of time that goes by, which are framed in a particular way. And when you do that with spatial experiences, you have that liberty of making sure that the underlying meanings, the messages you encode in that particular experience occur or are choreographed in that particular way that you want people to experience them. So world building and storytelling is essentially the inherent bit that goes into every project. It's just how those, so it's like the tone of voice changes, how the person is represented changes. The visual graphics and the content that manifest in that world changes, but that core ideology of you following a particular structure to focus on, or to make sure that the message needs to be communicated to like a group of people, that remains. And that's what brands eventually do, right?
Yeah.
That they stand for an ideology, they stand for it's a promise, like Alexander put it really well. And I like to think that we're not sure that we're not even selling experiences. We want to sell the idea of people needing to be loyal to a certain way of being in this world. Or as really interesting conversations went on this morning when people were talking about body and environment. And that's what I think that we would like for it to stand. But again, this is today. Maybe a year later, we would believe in some other cause and context that would have an inherent that is inherently sort of lined into every project that we do, right? Because that's us and our designer voice that sort of goes into that particular message.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue with that thought, back to Anirudh actually. When you're designing for yourself, like someone like Alexander or even Nimish, right? You guys have your own brands. But when you have clients to work for, like Ankita, Anirudh, or Alexander, when you did have clients to work for, how limiting is then that you've created this very clear identity of yours, right? You created this look that you own. And then if some client says, no, Ani, I want like really organic, hand-drawn, colorful stuff, do you just say no? I mean, imagine it's like a really big client and it's a really, really promising one. You really want to do it. Do you push your agenda in, or do you, as a brand, or do you say, okay, you know what, I'll try and see where we marry, or do you say, sorry, I cannot do this project, try this other guy?
Uh, I think it would depend on what it is, but often I would personally recommend someone who can do the job better. If I do believe I can do the job better, even if it's perhaps not at an execution level, but art directing or overlooking it, then I'd probably do it. Um, but I think designing as a service and designing for yourself are like exact two completely different things. And it's interesting because I mean, at currently as well, I have been kind of engaged in both of those practices where I understand that. I mean, fortunately, a lot of the work or potential work that I get approached for, it is something to do. Reference is usually my work, so that helps. But in the one-off cases when it's not my work or when it is something which is completely different, I don't think I would be able to pull it off. I'd probably tell them as it is, because otherwise, even if it's a well-paying job or whatever it might be, I think like it might cause you to lose your sanity after a while because you're not going to be able to crack it, and then they're going to end up wasting their time. You're going to end up wasting your time, and I don't think like any project is worth that. So I've kind of been trying to find that balance while I'm working on my own thing, along with commercial design projects. I mean, yeah, like I said, fortunately, it's kind of been in my realm, and usually I have a conversation before even starting the work just to understand what their headspace is, what kind of benchmarks do they have, what are the brands that they look up to. So kind of just meet them somewhere through a conversation, understand their perspective and how they look at their brand, because currently, I mean, when they approach you, they don't have any, there's no visual representation of the brand. It's just ideas. So it's important to kind of find a few benchmarks of what they like and where they would kind of like to see it and who is it for. And I think most important thing, because you said that I have a very strong aesthetic, I feel like it's my aesthetic is not important and neither is the client's aesthetic important, because when you're designing for a service, it's about doing it for that particular product or brand. So I don't think my design or design ego should overpower anything. So I that's why if I can't force fit my look into it, because what are we trying to sell over here? I think once you answer that question, then things get streamlined.
Also, I think from brand's perspective, like we are sort of collaborating with a lot of artists, and I keep looking at a lot of creative collaborators. One thing when we are scouting is really purity of that aesthetic. We are actually going to an Anirudh for a certain thing that we know this is his stuff, or we're going to somebody who's whether it is an Ankita who we want to experiment and we want to try something very rough and very new, and we are willing to sort of adapt to her aesthetic and to see how do the two blend. Because and also it's a two-way interview, right? Like the way Anirudh said, they are asking clients more and more questions. You're putting in questionnaires, and we've done this internally where I actually encourage artists to talk to me separately and the CEO separately, and because everybody's requirements and deliverables are very different, and I will have a very purist approach to creatives, and the commercial team will have a very sort of, oh, this is what we need now, and how does the creative collaborator translate the two together. And so having a pure aesthetic that just helps. Like I'm not going to go to Anirudh, as you mentioned, to get him to do like a hand little doodle. But he will be able to do it, but then it will still have his stake. It will completely. I mean, if he's open for challenging himself, which is what I do. I push a lot of people, and I tell them, can we do something you're not happy with, but you know what the end product should look like, and it creates the most amazing body of work. Um, And it's surprising because then there is a fatigue as well, with especially with illustrators. You know, it's such a beautiful and visual product that after a point, like I've seen a lot of my friends who are illustrators, and I feel like I don't know what I can do with them, because it is so limiting, and they just need more bigger ticket projects with the same aesthetic. You can't change that, and it's a beautiful thing, because you're just aiming for a bigger ticket project. You're not wanting to do small projects all the time.
Right. So, I mean, I think I will flip that question now, because I think that what it comes down to is to, like I, always say, there are two parts of any creative person. There is one, you are the artist, and it's you're doing it for yourself, and you have your style. And there's one where you are actually service providing, like Anand, you were mentioning. And then, do you shift to creative director mode, where you say, okay, I'll put together a team and kind of get that done, or you figure it out. But apart from that, the question is, once you create such a strong brand, and I think Nimish, I have a very parallel question for you on that. But going back to Anirudh, what if tomorrow you say, hey, listen, I'm sick of black and white, I want to do something completely different? Or does that already happen to you? Because I'm not talking about just black and white, I know you do play with other things, but what if you do you feel that once you become so, and you are a, almost like a cult status in Indian graphic design right now, you have so many followers, so many people looking up to you for that certain aesthetic, as Nimish mentioned. Suddenly, what if you decide, hey, today I want to do something completely different? And how difficult is it to pivot now that you've created this name for yourself in this particular sort of, or is it that this is your stream of consciousness and it's just never going to, whatever you do out of it is going to have that same stamp of you? Have you ever had that experience that you're just tired of doing what you're doing?
I mean, the thing is, I do a lot of different things, so that kind of keeps me engaged, keeps things a little fresh. Because one day I'm working on a branding project, the next day I'm kind of 3D mapping my own head to create some experimental motion graphic piece. So that way, it's kind of good. And if I wake up tomorrow thinking that I want to do something, or like if I want to do doodles, because Nimesh has convinced me to do that, then I should be able to do it, and I shouldn't let my brand dictate, or I shouldn't be held down by anything like that. Uh, of course, like there are some artists, visual artists, who literally just stick to, for example, polka dots like through a
Yeah.
lifetime. And then, in fact, even in something like that, it's very rich. You might think that the person is repeating the same thing for like 10 years, but it's like this relationship or like a bond that they have built with that kind of ethereal exploration that expands, and it's something that I guess the outsider wouldn't understand, but for that particular artist it might be like a deeper exploration.
Yeah.
But I don't think if you do wake up thinking that you want to do something completely different, I don't think the idea of your brand should limit you to do that, because you should never, like, I don't think you should tie yourself down because of how you're perceived, I feel.
Of course. So Nimish, I think my question to you is, how different was it to create for your own brand when you were doing Shift, and now you're creating a voice for Bhane, which is somebody else's, and like you said, you have other people also having a say in it. So where does brand come into this picture, and how pure, the purity of your vision, uh, is it the same Nimish kind of, is this same Nimish in there, or is it a different version of Nimish? What's happening?
So it is. Okay, so yes, it is the same Nimish, which obviously, and that is why Nimish is doing this, because then that is the kind of growth that has been envisioned for the brand. That there are certain signature silhouettes, or there is a signature house aesthetic that comes here. What it happens for under the brand is it expands. It is a lot more accommodating of opinions. It is answering certain set of commercial questions, and it is a take and spin on various things. So Bhane was or is sort of quintessential low-key brand with like great quality t-shirts. So while that will continue, there will be an element of sort of shift that will rub off, and there will be, even if not on the product, then in the visual communication. So I could literally take old Bhane clothes and just style them in a new way, and it will look new. It's because it was never seen from that perspective, and it's magical how it's literally because the final sort of, it's like the finesse that comes through with one particular uh, signature. That's exactly, it's almost like gift wrapping. So you can control it. You have to be a lot more accommodating. And I think that's pretty much got to do with Intel, right? And it's very tempting to accommodate because the Intel is so robust. We know that we are catering to a certain size of women, or we know we're catering to a certain, music loving clan, and then they dress up like this, or these are the brands they look up to. And then how do we try to convince them to expand their horizon, at the same time keep impressing them? So there are various intels which obviously will get addressed. And then it's always like there's always room to say no, but we're not doing what they like already. We're trying to convince them to like something new, which nobody knows whether it works or not. So it's really just putting it out there and saying, listen, this is going to be the next new thing. Sometimes it gets long. A lot of times it's just like a hard sell, and then we give up after a year or two, and then we move on to something else.
That's interesting. And I mean, Alexander, I think over to you in terms of, again, the same question to you, right? When you were working um, for clients, and now that you have your own, your label, where how is it limiting when you work for clients? Do you, now that you've own label, do you have more, because you've almost gone the opposite of Nimish, you're not working for other people, now working for yourself, and now you kind of have to figure out what your brand is about. um how is that jump happening? Is there a difference? Is there no difference? Do you feel freer? Do you feel more that like you have to have a clear voice?
There's an absolute difference, because previously I was just delivering my skills. Um, the you could say the branding or the storytelling, the values that the brand is communicating to the customer, the relationship between the brand and the customer, that's someone else. That's my client's job. So in a way, that's quite liberating because you can focus on doing your job. In another way, it's also very limiting because you have no say. That kind of the creative artistic freedom, you could call it, or expressing your identity is kind of on the back burner, typically in the roles that I've had. But luckily it's evolved industry. The concept of collaboration is much more important because people want to connect with much more of the brand. And that's where it's asking more of you, or asking different things of you. It's asking you to really reflect on, your values, basically. Why do you act the way you do within your work? So it is very different.
How much time how much time does that of your work sort of month does that take? Like you thinking about your brand versus you getting the job done, is it now you have meetings? Where are we going now? Where is this
direction? It is, yeah. So in terms of my own brand, the customer is obviously the most important. Like your relationship with them. And it's not a one-way street. It is a dialogue. Like we were talking about before, like working with clients and collaborating, that it is a collaboration, but it's a direct one to the customer, whoever's on the other end. And really defining that. You might have ideas about who they are, but like Nimish said, like you just have to get it out there and then start building on that. It's like your first iteration is your first launch, and then you do the next one, learning from that first launch.
So then, I mean, Nimish mentioned you do Intel. Alexander, you're saying you do client, you ask, client, you keep saying that you wait for clients to give you feedback on your brand. And I know Anirudh talks to his clients in a more direct way, because for Alex and Nimish, you guys are like literally talking to the masses. I'm going to go a little more zoomed in. What are the methods that you guys use to get that feedback in? That, hey, this is working. Do you go and do the tests in the beginning? Do you have conversations? Is it a good idea? Because a lot of our sort of viewers right now are people who started their own fashion labels, and people just creating what they feel like. But this idea of the feedback loop, and you can't just create a brand because you thought it looks great, but is there certain, how do you do your ground testing? What are some of the methods? And there's a question to actually all of y'all, but I'll start with Alex and Nimish.
I think what's great today is that you can just create an Instagram account and you have a brand. But I would say, again, it comes down to if you want to make a living off of it. And that is the challenge. That is what will drive the development. I would say that it can be very intimidating and daunting. But the best thing to do is to just create that Instagram account and create that test, that prototype. And prototype doesn't have to be like physical model making. It can be something like a post on Instagram or a Facebook post, and see if people start engaging with it. What you're communicating in this prototype, this way of reaching out, are people connecting with those values? I think the challenge is actually to up the volume and try to ignore a little bit of the quality in the beginning, but just kind of get it out, and then be really aware of when are people connecting, when are people engaging, when are people buying also. Yeah, that's what will should point you in the right direction.
So I have a question actually, just to follow up on what you said. So it's interesting that you say to kind of focus more on the output in the beginning, and less so on like refining the quality, and spending way too much time kind of refining and not getting it out there. So in terms of a brand or a product, let's say, do you feel like if you don't kind of refine that quality in the beginning, you have like a lost opportunity in terms of, if it does reach out there and it's not refined or it's not up to par, do you feel like that is do you feel like that's a major setback, or do you feel like it is something that, because it's too much to kind of allow hope that someone will understand that it's the beginning stages or prototype? How do you tackle that?
I would say it's back to what you said, that you have multiple projects. So you might put out work that isn't related to the brand. You could hide, you could say, or use the freedom of a pseudonym, or something like that. That isn't linked directly to what it is you're trying to develop, which will give you that freedom. I think also, I mean, it is definitely a balance, because if it is connected to your brand and your aesthetic is very important, obviously that is something you definitely have to take into account in terms of what you're putting out there, obviously. But I think this idea of trying different ways that isn't necessarily connected to the brand is a nice way to, like, a workaround, a hack, you could call it.
Yeah, I guess it's a good way to kind of just test the waters in terms of like what works, what doesn't work, and get feedback.
I'd like to just pitch in here by talking that when we were like, that was one of the strategies in narrative environments as well, because when you talk about spatial experiences, right, they're already large scale, and to prototype them, you essentially have to break that process down into multiple sort of stages. So you can go and test like smaller bits of it. That can you test whether people are understanding the story. You may do it through a very completely different prototype than possibly what the end outcome would be. So that also helps. I think what we are also trying to get into the practice of doing is trying to not be very worried about or at least trying, because we are control freaks and quality is something that is, difficult to let go of, but trying to put things out there which are works in progress in some ways, because when it's almost like a soft opening or a soft launch of ideas or ideologies, whether or not that people are responding to them, or sort of understanding what you're trying to say. How much does the communication need to be refined? How much does the language need to change to become accessible to a larger group of people? So I think it goes both ways, trying to find a balance between what's more important, whether you want to test like this specific bit of it and not too worried about the final visual or the aesthetic of it, or do you want to test how that final output is, and then how many ways can you refine it before it's definitely out there.
I remember, Ankita, you had done cards.
Yes.
So you guys do very interesting things, not just environments, you also create different aids. I think this sort of from an HCD methodology sort of point, but
yeah,
she created. Can you just talk us about those cards and how those are also testing it, which could actually become a whole like experience, but it was just a card game in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it was a prototyping method at that point.
So that's one of the most wonderful things, even something that Metli spoke about in the afternoon, that when we went off to narrative environments, both me and Metli come from spatial backgrounds. Even Ishita and Thomas, who are with me in Living Midnight, we all come from backgrounds of being interior designers and architects. So space is something that is almost like encoded. And we've, through our practices, through our experiences, we've realized that space need not necessarily just be bound to the constructs it is in. There are multiple ways that space is occupied, space unfolds. And when we went off to narrative environments, we realized that what's most important essentially is looking at narratives and the environment, whether or not that unfolds on a street, whether or not that unfolds where we met last, right? At Disco, on that table that was set up as this interaction point. That by itself is occupying that space in an interesting manner and allowing for that sort of an interaction. So what sort of engagements do you want? That becomes more important rather than what structures you've built or what kind of sequences you're talking about. So those cards essentially were around the idea of climate change, and they were based around Arab 2050 scenarios that the company puts out, and that's like supremely wonderful research that they do in terms of the future of where. So they're a forecast and a foresight company, at least a branch of them, and the rest of it is architecture and engineering and civil construction side of it. And they were based around these 4 plausible realities that going off from where we are currently in 2020 with the kinds of decisions that we are making, with the kinds of choices that we are making as a group of people. There are 4 plausible and frankly extreme futures that we can talk about. So they were based around this axis of planetary health and societal health. So it's a 4-square matrix essentially. So planetary health is on improves and declines, and societal health improves and declines. And that led to these 4 really extreme worlds where everything was hunky-dory and, we had gotten over all our climate change problems. And at the bottom, at the most extreme one was that we were all doomed. Half the people were dead. We were all wearing masks, which we already are. And, people are living in these really crazy zones with radiation and all of that. And then the 2 of them actually went off on different streams, where one became an authoritarian regime. Much so that, am I going off on a tangent?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. So one became this authoritarian regime under which the government or a higher power basically controlled the way you lived your life, and therefore controlled your emissions, controlled your movements, controlled how much carbon footprint you were leaving behind. And the other one was more of a negotiation where technology was, chucked out of the picture, and you became like these green sort of pushing away all the things that made the environment worse. But both sort of negotiated a very different kind, where you had to let go of certain things that you were currently enjoying or working towards. So the idea is that none of those realities were the first option, right? No matter which one you chose or which one you had an affinity with, there were these gray areas which told you that to do this, you're going to lose out on this. And if you make this choice, this is what the consequence is going to be. So it was an interesting conversation started about the kind of positioning people have regarding the whole climate change. And for us, it was, I felt like the best, this thing to also go meet people, to talk about what they're thinking, to talk about sustainability. So purely by the virtue of those cards, it became a point where we could start conversations, or we could engage people and leave. Like a lot of people from that event just came back to us with like, that was a really interesting experience because nobody else was talking about it. And I think that is something, when I was saying that ideologies people believe in or brands people believe in, they remember that. They remember that we tried to change or question their way of thinking. And that is something we want to do with all our projects. So that was just one of them.
Very fascinating. In fact, I mean, I don't know how much of you guys, with that description was very good, but I just having somebody who has experienced that and just knowing that it was done on one table, they were only playing cards and there was a chart behind. And we experienced, I actually went into the future with her, figuring, okay, if I want a green planet, I'll have to lose this. If I want this, I have to lose that. And that's just life, right? You can't have everything. And what are the different possibilities that can happen? And suddenly I was standing in middle of Bandra, there was just a bench, there was nothing. They had not created any physical environment, but I was literally having an experience. And I thought that was really fascinating, even just a way to, it could become a video game, it could become a whole movie, it could have become an amusement park if you want. But they had tested that idea just by that. And I think what I was trying to understand is, that different ways that we talk to our consumers, or we try to test out whether our ideas work, even as bizarre and really difficult ones to explain as the one she's explained. So I think, and also like Alexander said, there's another way that you can do is put it on Instagram, create a small prototype, see how people react, see if people are placing orders, and then they've bought it, and then it works, so then you start go and make it. But Nimish, I think, question to you again, do you guys actually, because you all are working on a much bigger scale now, especially with Bhani, you have a bigger sort of company now, do you actually do customer interviews? Do you guys do sessions where you talk to customers, and does that actually form, help define, okay, trend forecast for what your brand will need later? Do you do
I think, absolutely. So I see, eventually customer is who you are serving to. Customers have to be happy and impressed. We're always seeking for new customers, and especially when you pivot a brand, what we did with Hane, there is the risk of losing old customers, but then there is a hope of bagging new ones. So every single feedback that comes, whether it comes through friends and family, it comes through customers themselves, and so it's all very important, which is why in our weekly sessions we go through how many customers wanted to exchange. Is it because of the color? Is it because of the size? And then we course correct. That's just like standard business practice. I don't think we are unique on that front. Everybody does that. What is important is understanding who the next customer is, or tapping into their lifestyle. And groundwork is so important, like just being out there, like, standing on the shop floor, talking to buyers, talking to retailers, looking at what other businesses, what is popular, what is not. Like simple things like, everybody went out and made a mask. Did we want to do it? Not really. Were we tempted? Yes. But then comes that point of sustainability. Like, do we need to do mask as well? And then we're saying, no, we want to be smart about this thing, where that's not our USP. Of course, we can stitch a mask, but that's not going to resolve. There are better masks and better brands. We will work with them and let's promote that for our customers, rather than just using this as an opportunity. And cluttering, making more noise. We'd rather focus on selling our denims, which we know are better, and rather than make that quick buck. So clarity of understanding what customers really prefer, what they want. There are two ways to build. So one is identifying a lucrative business opportunity. A lot of people get into business. I'm looping back into your original question, because there are newer sort of people who are listening to us. They are hoping to launch their own brands. There's an opportunity. People say, oh yeah, designer wear sells, like, lehenga sell for like 2 lakhs. How much does it cost to make one? So there is that mindset where a lot of people get into it because they feel there is a niche that they can address with a smart business move, which is like a very investor driven. They know how to hack this, and it's literally calculated. And then other is a passionate brand building, which I presume all of us are doing right now. It is fairly indulgent. Whoever can support it is doing that and is being very careful. And of course, you offset it with side revenue within the business. So that's what happened at Shift as well. While I was taking Shift very slow, we would do job work for other things. We would take up other projects like, say, Taxi Fabric or whatever, commercial, non-commercial, just to be able to put our work, put like our practice out there. So it circles back onto how slowly you want to build this brand, where is the business opportunity, and then identifying a USP, because people will always need clothes. There is never going to be, we are in, people will always want food. There can't be enough restaurants. There can't be enough, clothing brands, but the relevant ones will float. There will always be clutter in the market. Because these are basic commodities. It's not like and the same thing applies in tech as well, right? Like, do we need another app? Not really. But we need better experiences. Everybody gets to make that elevator pitch, and you have to get that thing right.
I think you answered my next question. So great. I think that was my next question to everyone here. With the barriers to entry, which have sort of really dropped now with the internet, everyone's creating brands so quickly. From an environmental standpoint, what is your message to young, young brands and startups right now? What's your advice? Because yes, there will always be more food and clothing brands, but does the world really need that? And do we need more clothes, more spoons, more food, more lipsticks, more creams, all of that, right? And we are all, no matter what you all are, we are all creating. I mean, I run a design studio as well. I know. I'm always questioning, why are we constantly doing this? Earlier, like I said, the barriers to entry to start your own company was very tough, and now it's getting easier and easier as we go along. If you just, what someone told me very recently, that what used to be just a hobby has now become everyone's business, like, and everybody's starting a brand. So any hobby has become a brand, and that's very encouraging and very exciting, because a lot of people have become entrepreneurs and getting to kind of, like you said, giving it a shot, an elevator pitch. But what does that say to the world that we are inhabiting? Because everything is just ultimately going to the garbage, right? So yeah, what is each of your take on that? And Alexander, I'll start with you because you're the product designer in the house and most closest to this topic.
Thank you. I think so. Personally, I've thought a lot about it, and that has made me it's made me question my practice, the climate crisis, even from university, because we create stuff as designers. We create things. It's not digital, so putting it into perspective that we are 8 billion people now. In 30 years, we will be 11 billion people. We will still need stuff, but we just want really good stuff. So it shouldn't stop you. It should motivate you to do things better. It's not something you can ignore either. I think that would be my main advice. You can't ignore it due to physical circumstances. And you can't ignore it because more and more customers want it. They are demanding it. So it isn't something you can ignore. Yeah, and I think also, I mean, in terms of being very cluttered, and there being lots of things on offer, there's an added pressure to be innovative, to actually add something new. It isn't just the same thing styled differently. I think that is also something that it should be on your agenda, that you're contributing with something that has value, that responds to needs, and that has that relevance, that it is not new for the sake of new, but you're actually contributing with something different.
Right. So, I mean, and as a product designer, do you also think and I keep saying product designer because I think there's also this understanding of how you set up, because if say, there's a lot of companies that have set up now 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and it's difficult for them to pivot. They have to go back to their roots. But I think it's great, from a service design perspective, or even like Ankita, from like if you're planning out a company, think of a company as a design. And if you think of it from the start, and Nimish, I think I read a lot about your whole dream was about sustainable. How can you bring sustainability in fashion, right? How does one start when say, okay, I'll create more lehengas in the world, right? Okay, fine. I know I can make brides look even better and cooler and have a new idea of new aesthetic. How from a business planning standpoint, how, or a brand planning standpoint, how can you from the beginning make sure that everything is going to take, it's not going to be bad? Because also I think I have been in industry for 12 years now, and when I started off, nobody told me that this is my responsibility, right? Nobody told me I have to be careful about the environment. And now suddenly it's like, hey, you're the designer, you're the bad guy, and that guilt has come in. So, but people who are starting off now can be very careful about it. So, any tips
Yeah.
any of y'all could give? Say, hey, you know what? When you start, remember to do this, and don't forget that, and take responsibility for this.
So, sadly, okay, one is being a designer and passion product creator, and second is being good at running a business or just having like business acumen. They two are very separate things. Like you could be an amazing designer, but have like a very bad hand on running your finances or your, keeping your teams motivated, expanding at the right time, not over investing, all of those. Like, so the business acumen part is completely different to product design and making beautiful products. Finding a synergy between the two is very important. No matter how many tips people give you, you are going to make your own mistakes, and that's the only way you have to learn. I actually go back to tips I received in hindsight. And I literally remember people telling me, oh, why don't you do this? But then it was too soon for me to understand what that meant. I could only understand because I had to get my hands dirty to know what risk could have been averted. Yes, all these tips help much later in life. So it really depends at what age you're setting up your own business or your own practice. See, tips are literally you have to be hungry for that particular industry, and the product have to be able to do enough research to know what people are doing wrong and what you want to correct. You can correct by taking up a job and getting more experience on your hand before you get into self uh, creating a startup or sort of going in with your investment. Or B is you sort of you're just more aware, and that's exactly what is driving this hunger to have your own business. There are no real tips per se, because there's no rule book, right? It's like it's business, like whoever, and there are so many shitty like products doing so well. It's because they're very good with putting it out there. They're so good with marketing. You see such overrated creative individuals or brands just being out there, and they have a certain strength which offsets your strength of being like even better designer, or so there are no tips. You really have to get your hands dirty. You have to be very, very mindful, and have a logical reason. Is it financial gains, or is it wanting to create like a beautiful product, which and I literally got the most amazing tips from very sort of veteran people in the industry who said, don't bother selling anything, just make a beautiful cashmere sweater. I won't even say who told me that. And they were like, don't worry about making money. But I was like, no, I have no money left. Like, I really need like commercial product, because there are 4 stores who sell this and they don't even make enough money. So you get various tips. It's an indulgent process. You have to indulge. Only then you get it right, I think.
Anirudh, anything from your past that any tips you'd want to give to start a brand if someone's starting off again from scratch?
I mean, just to follow through what Alexander and Nimish said. So, I mean, he's right. It is completely like an indulgent process. Um, like every graphic designer or any visual artist has always had this one thought. Okay, I'm gonna start my own t-shirt brand, right? Like every other person has had that thought, and similarly, so have I. And it's something that I've been kind of working on. The reason I haven't kind of collaborated with any other brand on t-shirts or any of that is because I've always had a certain idea of like, if I make a t-shirt, I'm probably going to make it like that, but I'm not in a rush to make that, because I understand I have my design practice as well, so I can kind of take time and explore what I really want to do in it. And it's something that I've kind of just, it's been marinating for about 3 years. And just I mean, I've been sitting on the logo of the brand for 2 years, and I still like it, which is a good thing. So, but I mean, just last week, kind of just finishing up the actual stitching and all of those things. So
Wow.
I mean, this is a whole new kind of space for me. So I love hearing what Nimish has to say, because obviously he's been doing it for a long time. So it's interesting, and I love the fact that I can now separate the two things, because I don't look at myself as a brand. I am a designer. Perhaps someone who might have seen me on my Instagram profile might think of me, oh, it's a brand, but it's not that. I'm a person. I'm a graphic designer, and that's what I do. And I make art and I put it on Instagram sometimes. But with this, I'm kind of having a different kind of approach, trying to figure out what is it that I want to make and why do I want to make it? Who is it for really? Because like you said, I don't want to saturate the market. There's already so many things, right? There's so many products out there. So kind of just identifying what it is that needs to be done, and perhaps then refining it based on feedback. But yeah, it's more like a personal kind of exploration, to kind of see where it goes. It's basically an itch that you have to scratch, so you scratch the itch.
Right. But Ani, for you, actually, my question would pivot a little bit. It was not about branding, but if somebody, a young graphic designer, because there are graphic designers also in this group, obviously you've made your name very well in the industry. Is there something that you'd like to give a tip to somebody starting off, trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to, stand out, or even have my own aesthetic, or and get, start off on my own, because you did start off on your own. Have you actually, I don't really know that about you. Have you worked for a studio before you started, or did you start off from the bat?
No, I worked at my first job was while I was in college, and instead of doing an internship, they offered me a job. So I used to kind of go back and forth. Uh, it was at Grandmother India.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was my first job, and then I joined another company after that for some time. While I was doing that, I was also doing freelance work at night. So that kind of just led me to be like, okay, I think maybe I can just detach and see where this goes, so I can have a little more creative control over what I'm doing,
Mhm.
and just have a more collaborative kind of relationship with the client, and not looking at them as a client. Because while I was at an agency, no matter how big the client is, or if it's a big client, you treat them like a client. But I think if you just eliminate that and you treat them as a person, you just tell them like, listen, I really think that's a bad idea. I'm not sure if it's going to work. If I was you, I probably wouldn't do it. Just
Right.
speak to them as a friend, then they can trust you a little more, because they know that you care. And I think that is really important. So I mean, I completely diverted from your question, but I don't have a specific tip for anyone. It's something that's different from everything that you guys have probably been hearing. But yeah, I don't think I have a specific tip. If you guys want a specific tip, then you can probably reach out to me later. And if it's a specific question, then I can help you all with that. Yeah.
All right. And Alex, what is Alexander? You know, you've worked with big brands and you started on your own. Um, Starting off, what age was it that you started your own company? I mean, how many years in the industry did you work before you started off your own practice? And
I started my studio in 2017, so it's fairly fresh and it's a very slow growing process. I'm actually doing an MA now to actually have like a playground where I can really explore new ways, yeah, new products that maybe don't fit into my brand, right? So I have that freedom. So a great way to a good tip, always go back to school if you can to kind of test everything. Um, yeah.
Is, is
I
that
also sorry, go ahead.
is that helping? Do you think an MA has helped you look at your brand or your own practice in a different way?
Absolutely. It's something that if your teachers don't challenge you on, you should really challenge yourself because it is like a good opportunity to do that. I would also say like on a very maybe this is like on a very private note, but I think you should a main tip is also to take it seriously. Like take your talent and your work seriously, like you would someone else's, like you would the people you look up to, your mentors. Um, I think that's also a really really important perspective to have. That it's just as important as everyone else, you know, what you're doing.
But Alexander, I think this is where I mean I'm going to ask a personal question from my
Go ahead.
perspective. I've seen that a lot of people who start their own brands, and I was actually watching documentaries of Alexander McQueen and even Robbie Williams, right? They were in a way, they had taken themselves too seriously. You know, I think when people reach those, you know, really high levels of in the design world, and of course, you know, maybe we're not there, but even all of us, once we start creating something which sees some success and we see, okay, this is working with the people, it becomes very difficult for us to pivot, you know. The fact that you are going back to college and saying, okay, let's relook at my studio practice, that's a very scary thought for someone like me, or I don't know if, you know, Anuradh, Nimish or Ankita had to say, hey, let's question what we've been doing, even though it's working, and but I just want to see what else. um you know, there's this friction that what if now if I reinvent and everything just changes and it just gets ruined. And Nimish, you've had that. You had, you know, Shift was doing really well, and when Bhane came in, was it scary for you to say, okay, Shift can pause? Was it, that must have been very, there must have been some friction there, right, to take that decision?
Yes, it was because I mean, yes and no, because it just meant like a bigger opportunity, and it was what where Shift needed to be. Like it just got like uh, the aesthetic or the practice got a bouncing board. Like it just, you know, it made things more real and it was more like, you know, out there. So it was an opportunity. It was very, I was nervous about the whole situation because you're almost like putting a huge deal of work on the back burner. But then, you know, at the same time, I feel like uh, it's an opportunity to shock people. Like if Shift were to come back, like then it'll have a newer, fresher perspective. That'll be just about enough sabbatical for the brand. And then, you know, and then it gets revived. So then there's freshness to it and it's, you know, it's relevant because Shift had also come to a point where a lot of other brands were very similar. And just breaking out of the whole thing just meant bigger investment and you know, more aggressive marketing push. So this way, it kind of gets a very tiny sabbatical for whatever, you know. It was like a palate cleanser for Shift. So I saw it as an opportunity. It is. I mean, yeah. As I said, it's like mixed feelings.
Feelings, yeah. And also I think you have to have a certain amount of detachment to your work, because Anirudh and actually Alex, both of you guys, you all have your names on your practices, right? Like I purposely called my studio local because I wanted to stay away, and I still feel very attached to it. And if, you know, if I had to change completely what I'm doing, I would be very scared. um so I think, how does one detach themselves from their practice? Let's not call it brand anymore, Ani. I know what you're saying, but just even your practice, right? You've created this reputation for yourself, and suddenly you're like, okay, now I don't want to do graphic design, I want to make t-shirts forever, or I want to, I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
maybe how does how does the detachment even happen, you know, after, especially after doing it for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years?
I mean, I don't think
Karishma, actually, that's a good question for you as well. I know you're not in this panel, but you created Kasha, which is amazing. And like again, that how far is the creator and the brand? Where is that space, and how do you maintain that space over the years?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to cut in here because I think what Alexander said about going back to school and studying is amazing. I would love to do that. I think that we
All
evolve.
of
I really would love to do that. I think we're evolving, right? And if we're going to keep evolving, it's okay to understand that so will your business, so will your brand, so will your decisions. So I really see it like that. I feel like whatever you have created, if today I come to a place where I see that I'm going to learn something better, maybe come back, like Nimish is saying, taking a break from it, coming back. I feel very fluid about this entire thing. I feel like it's it's not a bad place to be in. I feel like it would only help us grow as individuals and as designers. So that's it. I'm going to mute myself again.
also I think yeah, just following through it's like when you are in university or when you are in school or you're just fresh out of college, like there's that huge trajectory of learning because you're trying out everything at that point. I remember when I was in uni, I was like, I'm gonna try motion graphics, I'm gonna try animation, I'm gonna try graphic design, I'm gonna try illustration, I'm just gonna try all the practices of visual communication. And I was doing all of that for a while. And then what happens is, I guess, over a couple of years when you get busy with projects and work, that skill set kind of plateaus until there's a new opportunity which might not pay you, but it might kind of give you give you that that little bit of a chance to just be like, okay, great, I'm going to do this because now I can like learn a new skill set. Because for the first few months of education, first few years of education, you're learning a lot.
Yeah.
And then when you get really busy with work, you kind of, the skill sets that you have, they're just kind of getting refined. Perhaps you're not adding new tools to your to your arsenal. So I think that little reset is great. It adds fresh perspective, um, whether you're kind of actively seeking for it or not.
That's true. And I think you become jaded after a certain point if you're running the same business for a while, right? It's also, I think, I know, I think we're all inspired to go back to uni again. I think UAL is suddenly going to get like 6 new applicants, if not more. So, Alexander, tell us how is it to do that? Were you able to say, okay, I know I've started this and I have some people for, also your current customers and people in the industry, they are looking at you, right? Like, also, I think we think that people are looking at us more than people are looking at us.
People
Anyway,
are only looking at themselves,
Maybe.
people
honestly.
are looking at themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've considered starting a whole new project which isn't connected, a whole new brand, practice, whatever we want to call it, where my name isn't connected to it. To have that freedom that I'm experiencing doing schoolwork, where it is more of a closed, you could call it safe environment. I am aware that I might be alienating clients by going off on a tangent, doing something completely different, because you are potentially at risk of doing that. And I think it's just you should be really aware of it because you don't want to limit your work. That's the worst thing you can do. It's just about finding that workaround. Yeah, maybe like a pseudonym or an anonymous, I don't know, a website or where you can just offload all of it, but still get some engagement, feedback, interaction, whatever you want to call it, so it doesn't stay in a bubble.
And I think I had one last question for you, Alexander, especially since you're the only non-Indian on this panel. How much has sort of culture and permeated into your work, and what is your sort of take for if you were to talk to our product designers and on this in this group, any sort of how can Indian graphic, like what is Indian product design, how can we bring that into our work, and do you is that something that you look at from the outside and have some sort of inputs on?
I think you should definitely be aware of the culture because it's connected to the people you're trying to reach, and then there's also the element of And that doesn't necessarily have to be geographical, because today we're so connected, we're hyper connected. It could be more a tribe, but that's also like a culture doesn't have to be necessarily a geography. But also understanding where you fit in that culture, what makes you unique. I was born in Japan, so that's something I'm heavily borrowing from. It is a unique experience I have had that makes me unique. And that it was a fairly conscious choice, that you can probably find someone else that does the same, that's Danish and borrows from a Japanese aesthetic. But for me, I'm not willing to compromise on that because I feel very, connected to the place I was, because I was born there. I feel like I could justify it, and everyone else who's just borrowing it for aesthetic reasons, they're faking it. I'm the real deal.
And your take on Japan will be your take on Japan. It's also, I think, Nimish, what you were saying, creating those boundaries, or where do those boundaries even come from? It's your own experience that, okay, this works, this doesn't work, because in my aesthetic, which is then borrowed from your culture, it's all sort of, it's still, at the end of the day, a brand is personal, and whatever we are creating is very much an extension of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the best people doing it, right? Ultimately, Nimish, like you said, Bhane got Nimish for Nimish, and Anirudh, you're doing what you're doing because you're the person doing it. If you had to do another thing, then it wouldn't be you, right?
I think that's the pleasure of self-employment, or pleasure of setting up your own brand, because you're its best mascot, and you're its best representative in terms of creating raw material, or looking for raw material to be able to create a final product. That's the pro side of having your own business, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you are if you feel like you have like a creative block or whatever it is, you will break through. And if you're being inspired by somebody else's practice, you are very cognizant of what from that practice you can adapt and make it your own. So yeah, I think that's the pro of like starting your own business. It's in your control.
Fantastic.
I think I have a slightly different thing to pitch in on this, that it's not necessary we being the kind of practices or the kind of practitioners that we are. I think it's also possible for a change here, where there is a possibility of setting up almost a rhizomatic practice, wherein you do not have to be the sole mascot. If there are a group of practices that sort of believe in a larger cause, then there's a possibility of you being a collective with multiple. So maybe it's this group of people that you work with do this practice towards a certain idea, or towards solving a certain issue. But maybe there's another collective that you could actually, work with. So it also doesn't become very individual. And the possibility of collaboration and the directions in which your own practice can develop also becomes multiple. And that's something that we are experimenting with, or trying to experiment with right now, that individually and through being part of multiple collective practices, how do you actually establish that idea where sometimes you are working for yourself, but sometimes somebody else is the creative director and you're giving your skills, but essentially you're working towards very causes that you believe in, or ideas that you believe in. So
then the skill set, so your skill set now are of a curator, and your curator is skull. So it is still in your control. You're not going to have like another somebody else whose practice you don't sort of appreciate, or it doesn't work with you. So you're controlling. You're still controlling collaborators. Which indirectly works as a brand. So if you think of a solo brand and you think of a multi-brand store, like, whether it is literally like, multi-designer store, which has so many designers and so many aesthetics, but it still is controlling an overarching theme. So there is a difference between Net-a-Porter and Matches Fashion, while they'll have exactly the same brands. And then there is a difference between a Chloe and a Gucci. So there is still a control. There is still, eventually it does, the pyramid forms, and then there is like a topical force, whether it is commerce or creative.
Does it have to be though? That's the point, right? That you could curate it at one point of. So the whole point of a collaborative practice, especially amongst equals or even amongst people with different experiences. Like, for example, if you, me, and Anirudh were to collaborate, or me, Anirudh, or Alex were to collaborate, there will be somebody who not all of us won't be in the position of there'll be a conversation, there'll be a democratic conversation, and we all come from very different perspectives as well, right? So the idea is then not to build a particular brand, but to build a specific commune or a specific story. So and what you bring to it can come from the different brands or the different practices we come from. But having there is no top-down approach. That's what I meant to say. That there's a round-table collaboration in what is going out, and therefore each person's perspective is a part of that. And that does not necessarily, and there is control. And in that, it would be that me having to relinquish some of that creative control to you, or, you having to then agree with Anirudh's idea of doing certain things. And then we come to a consensus about how to go about it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be top down.
No, so then what you're talking about is like an agency practice, which is what most ad agencies would work on, because they'll have various creative collaborators because they're servicing various requirements from clients. There is still an overarching commercial head who is controlling all of it and curating all of it. So yes, it is possible, and it does. I mean, we've seen this happen, but it takes a while to mature, and it's a much bigger practice we're talking about.
Yeah. Also, I think what Ankita was talking about is working at an ad agency. They are working on different clients, but Ankita's maybe saying one product. Imagine working on one project, but 6 different people. I know it sounds like too many cooks.
Wow.
There are ways to kind of make that happen, right?
Sure, of course, it is possible.
I think
it's like an interesting dance, right? Where you have to, there's going to be an interesting push and pull between, because everybody comes with very different kinds of experiences, especially if you come, that's what multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary collaboration would mean, right? At the end of the day, where you bring, it's given, like you come to that table with the given that everybody comes from, like everybody who's coming to the table makes sense. And therefore their voice needs to, some bit of their idea needs to go through. And how do you then manage to do it is how successful it is, how well it's done, or how actually, I don't know about commercial success, but how culturally or through its communication it becomes successful, then that is something that has to be negotiated. But
yeah, I think it's
definitely.
all right, guys, I'm gonna have to dive in because I'm getting messages from all the organizers. We're almost out of time right now, but I want to open it up to some questions. So all the people who have questions here who are listening in can either drop in your questions on the chat or can actually unmute yourself and just ask up.
Hi, I have a couple of questions, if I may. I had questions for Nimish and Anirudh, but everyone else, please feel free to answer as well. For Nimish, I had a question. So you know how every region and country has its own culture and textile, sort of the history. So in India, especially for men, it's just an observation, I could be wrong, but for like casual wear or like leisure casual wear, we haven't really, like, it's mostly Western wear that we picked up, whether we talk about t-shirts, pants, or shorts. Like, do you think as a creative yourself, like, are you thinking about this, or with the brands you're working with, to sort of contemporize like our own Indian wears? Like, say how, like, just as an example, if you contemporized a dhoti, how would that be like look like? Or if you could wear it in a daily wear, like, is that something you're actively thinking about?
So if you observe cultural sort of role on men's clothing, so women's obviously has always been far more interactive, and it's always a lot more interesting, and it's dynamic from regions and sub-regions, versus with men, we could literally list like 5 to 10 items which are Indian, which eventually is literally dhoti. So as a subcontinent, the least. I mean, you don't really wear clothes. It's literally you just cover up, like, and that should do. And then depending on what region you're in, you're layering that much, or you're taking it off even more. Now, sadly, what has happened is, with transition of fashion trends, men's traditional clothes have fallen under the costume category, and women's clothes have stayed in popular culture, which means women still wear a sari and run and hop onto a bus.
Yeah.
Or, like, it's because it's not like a kimono, which is costume. So men's
Yeah.
clothes become like the kimonos of Japan, where if you
Yeah.
wear dhoti, it's like you're going for an event, or you're trying to make an ultra bold statement. But at the same time, if you look at, like, rural neighborhoods, they are, like, in South India, they are still practicing dhoti and
Yeah.
material. It's part of state uniform.
Yeah.
So whatever could have been retained has been retained. Eventually, because there was very little clothing option for men, they went into Western wear, and also working, right. Like, Indian men were working within sort of British setups, and they had to follow the British dressing protocol, what is legit for workwear. Hence, we have formal clothes and formal office looks, which I still don't understand why men in India have to wear suits,
Yeah.
because it's so
Time to
hot.
decolonize.
Correct. But then that happened for almost 80 years,
Yeah.
and women have only gotten into sort of work zone much
Yeah.
later. So they were always supposed to be in a traditional look. They were never supposed to be in sort of office clothes, which is why the transition of Indian women's wear stayed on, and it's steady. And now it is happening out of choice through sort of
Yeah.
exposure.
And for Anirudh, I was just curious about. So I know you had an exhibition last year, I believe. I know you have a strong design practice, but is your fine art practice like a byproduct of years of your design practice, or do you see yourself headed in that direction?
It was out of frustration of looking at the screen for too long. No, but no, it's something. Even while I'm working on design projects, I'm always kind of working on art.
Yeah.
Whether it's through music, or it's through like sound design, or like music production, or like painting. I'm always kind of um, for me that's kind of for me, when I take a break, that's kind of what I like to do. I try to kind of just engage with, whether it's music or whether it's with creating art. And The exhibition was basically it was these acrylic paintings that I was kind of making uh, for about 3 to 4 years, but I was just doing it for myself. And then someone saw them and they really liked them, and then it kind of turned into this exhibition afterwards. But essentially, for me, it was more of a getaway from my screen, because I used to make I do my design practice in front of the screen, and if I take a break, or if I want to create something else, and if it's music or if it's art, I was also doing that on my screen. So for me, it was kind of a breakaway, to kind of just go into like a slightly more meditative space. um, yeah, that's how it kind of emerged. But yeah, I still do it. I don't post about it that often, but like every now and then I still continue that. It's basically this one exploration which I've been doing for a long time. um, so yeah, I do plan to continue making those paintings, just seeing where it goes, just as a personal thing. But yeah, I'll see where it takes me, I guess.
Great. I don't think we have time for any more questions. Karishma, do we have any time for any more questions?
It's past 7:30, so I guess we're actually done.
This was great fun. That time flies when we are having fun. So, yeah, I think what we, of course, now you guys, we are all on the group, and any questions that you have to any of our participants today, you can ask there, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. It was fantastic talking to all of you. I think we've covered amazing sort of highs and lows in different aspects of creating your own brand and brand practice, and it's been fantastic talking to all of you. Thank you for logging in, and thank you for everyone who came in and um, heard us out. Thank
You.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Ashni.
Karishma
Yeah.
and
Thank you.
the
Thank
entire
you so much
US.
for inviting us.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, this is our last session, and we're actually done with this 2 days of like.
Yeah, it's
Digital
been the most
stuff.
productive Sunday, I feel, in like many months. Listening
I
to
like
everyone with such great conversations. So
I just
yeah.
like to say thank you to everybody and like everyone who came and people who have been listening, and also my family. It's Sunday, so they clearly are done with this and they're just like talking in the background now. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll do more things and see each
Yeah.
other soon.
And thank you, Karishma, for and everybody who
Yes.
sort of
There are many of
organized.
us.
Yes,
There's
everybody,
Sopna,
like the whole
Geeta,
team.
Saksha, Megha's here, so everyone. There's so many Virat, so many people who made this possible. So
Thank you so much for initiating this and having us all
We need
pitch
to
in.
do this in 2D, 3D next time in our
Yeah, for sure.
Done.
We have to do a live fest now. We're ready for the live fest
live
Okay.
fest.
for the next year edition.
Yes.
Okay, thank you everybody. Have a good Sunday evening, whatever's left of it.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
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 Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
My dad's like, no one could hear me talking in the background. I think you were right here.